So first thing, just make sure project settings, go to render, sorry, not project settings, go to plugins, procedural. And there you go. Make sure you have this. And when you got it, you need to restart. I already have it, so I won't restart. Okay, so let's create one from scratch. Let me delete this. And let me show you this graph. So this is what I did. And it has a bunch of things that I will show you. Very, very common operations you will commonly use in this kind of content. When I used to work at Ubisoft, I used to do a lot of Houdini stuff. I won't tell in why specifically because I cannot. But I must tell you that this is very similar to Houdini, and I will even dare to say it's even better because it has a lot of things that are Unreal only stuff, which is great, right? So what you have here is basically a logic to spawn different kinds of objects, okay? So you have the grass, you have the small rock boulder, you have the medium ones. What else? You have the trees, you have the big rocks. So all this logic is very simple. And we use a lot of nodes that you will use over and over and over again, okay? So let's create one from scratch. I will just go here, go to PCG, and create a PCG graph. This will be my live stream forest. So I will just drag and drop here. And you will see that I have a volume. This volume will basically determine how I will spawn my objects, right? So if I make it bigger, I will have a bigger area. If I make it smaller, I have a smaller area. Okay, so let's double click on this. Let me move this thing here. And let me close this. By the way, if the streaming is not going well, let me know because last time it didn't. And I want to make sure that everything goes smooth, okay? So yeah, eventually everyone gets official plugins. It's just that, you know, it takes time. And it has, Unreal Engine has so many features that you may love procedural content generation, but someone somewhere out there don't really want it. So that's why they make it a plugin. So first things first, in your input, you have different stuff, right? You can put an actor here and basically you need an input to say, hey, I want my points to spawn here. It can either be a mesh, but also it can be a landscape, right? So we're gonna use the landscape here. Okay, let's start. So what is the first thing you need to do is to generate points, right? So I will grab this landscape, and you have a lot of samplers here. If you go to sampler, you go sampler here, you will have like different types of samplers. I will use my surface sampler, okay? So what it is, I will grab my landscape here. I will go here and nothing shows up. But if you right click and click on debug, you will see that you have a bunch of cubes here that you can use, okay? For basically each cube, we call it points really, but each cube will be a spawn point. Now, why it's a cube and not a point? It's because it has a bounce here. So if I go here, just remove my camera for now. Okay, so if I I go here, each bones have some radius, right? Like X, Y, and Z, right? And my objects will spawn within this radius, right? What I want to do is to change the size of this. So to do this, I will just go here. And let me just grab some space just so that we can take a look at what's going on. I can change the points per square. As I reduce this, for example, you can divide with 2, you will have less and less points. If you have 1, you will put all the points everywhere, right? Notice that these points don't really overlap. They can get really close like this, but they don't overlap at the beginning, right? So what can you do? Well, you can change the points, the the size of this. For example, I can put this like 500 and 500 and 300, and you will see that you have like these points. You can put like 300 here, and what the size will determine is the size of your rocks, right? So what I'll do first is spawn some big rocks. Okay, so I will go here and spawn some big rocks here. So I will just put okay, static mesh spawner. Okay, so a static mesh spawner will spawn a mesh, and I already have some meshes here that I can use. I can go to the 3D assets, and I can just press my static mesh here. Now, which one I want? I want something big. Okay, so I want to choose this one. Inside of here, by default, if you connect this, you won't have the mesh there, because you need to put the mesh entry here. So if I go to mesh entry, I can just click here and I can just put the mesh here. And now you will see that I have my mesh. Now, everything overlaps because my bounding box is telling me, hey, this is more or less what you're looking for, right? So in my case, instead of putting 500 in Y, I will put 500 there. And this is more or less the bounding box of this object here. Okay, and you can change like how many you want. Like if you want less, you will continue to do less and less and less till you got none. In my case, if this is already too big, I will have like a minimum number of points. Or you can just change this and it will change completely. Like the bounding box will really change how your graph works. You can also change the seed. If you change the seed radius, you'll have something like this. Now, if you get a result you don't want, that's normal. That's why the name is procedural. You can just change the seed, okay? And you can change this to like a bigger bounding box so you can have less of them. Okay. So what else you can do? Well, you can do the transform node. Everything, it's like, let me just press D here. Remember D for debug. Okay. So I will just check the comments in a while. Okay. So, and then we will go through a Q&A. So if you press D, you get the debug. You can also change the debug type if you don't want the cube. Like, for example, you have different elements that you want to debug different ones. You can put this thing, for example, and now you will have like a big axis here that maybe it's better for you. In my case, I will just leave the cube, okay, because it's a bounding box. Okay, so it makes sense. So what I will do, let me just make this thing big. I will just do a transform. Transform points. So you have different transforms here. Okay, the transform points basically will allow you to change each property, right? Each point here has some properties. It can have the location, it can have the scale, it can have density, it can have a bunch of stuff, okay? So you can just put the transform points here. And remember, this will actually add up because you can connect many. So Alt click and delete some of them. And you can just play with this. For example, this mesh by default is like two, it's like floating. So I can put -30 and -50 max. So that will fix it. If that doesn't fix it, remember that maybe you're not using the right asset. So I can just go here to my 3D assets. And let me see if one of this may be better. For example, this one. This one is not better because I have this part here and I will need to push it down and I don't want that. So I will just leave this one here. And instead of following the rotation of this, I will make it like only go up. Okay, so how can I do that? Well, I can put -180 here and 180 to have a random rotation. And to avoid this kind of stuff where something's floating here, I will just go for the absolute rotation. Okay, so absolute rotation means it will use this rotation and it will not use the rotation that it has when you have the landscape. Okay, so if you already have this, just make sure like maybe -50 and -80. Okay, let me do that. Both options can work for you really. If you really see holes, use -100, -130, and that's it, right? So these are my big points, right? And I can do a bunch of stuff here, but because I'm only spawning those, I don't really need to check the intersections for now. What I want to do is to spawn something else. I want to spawn a little rock. So I will grab another surface sampler. We just make it bigger. I can put it here. And I can press D. Okay. So what you can see now is I can spawn my rocks here. But each rock will basically spawn inside of this. And I really don't want that because I don't want to render meshes inside another mesh. This will consume resources. It will make everything more laggy. And basically, you don't want to render resources that won't be seen. Okay? So, what I can do is to remove this thing by using a difference. Okay? So, I can grab the source here. And then I can put some differences. You go. I can put difference here. And what this will do, let me just remove the static mesh for a moment. What this will do is to remove all the points that are intersecting here. By default, this won't work because it's set at minimum. We need to put it on binary. And when I check here, let me put this thing here. Now you will see that my points are now scattered across places where my big rocks are. So if I check this one, you will see that my big rocks are here and my small rocks are here. Okay, so that's the thing with this. Now, it's very simple. We can just do the same. We can remove this thing here. And what we can do is transform points. There you go. Transform points will basically change the rotation, everything. Now, you want to put these transform points before this in case like you make a lot of transforms. So you want to put it before. Okay. And now what we will do is what we did before. We will play here with the rotation and everything. So for example, the scale can be, the minimum can be 1 and the scale max can be 2.3. So now you will see things start getting a little bit messier because you are start to intersect stuff. And you know, you don't want that. Okay, so let's spawn a mesh just so you can see what's going on. It's always a good idea to spawn the mesh. Just remove my camera so you can see better. So the mesh here, let's put one of this. Okay, and you can spawn many. Like if you don't like what you're seeing, you can spawn like this one and this one. This will give you more variation. Okay, and you will see that in each box you have something here, except in the ones that are the big rocks, right? So you have this one here, and you know, it's kind of annoying. So let's make this one bigger because I'm sure it's annoying for you to watch when I have like a small screen. Okay, so what you can do is after you do this, you can do a self pruning. And if I connect this one to here, you will see that I have much less. I will show you what it does. If I have my cubes here, some of them are intersecting. Okay, and if I go here, I can just change the radius of this thing. Okay, let me put the D here. Basically, everything that is intersecting here will be removed. Like here, for example, you have this one. And because it's put to large to small, it means that it will get the largest one. If I put the small to large, yes, should be different. Let me see. Yeah, it should grab the one that is small, and then all the intersections will be removed, right? So it depends what kind of objects you want. If you want small objects, choose the small to large option. If you want bigger objects, you want the large small. You have all equal to if you want, but or you know, remove duplicates. This will pretty much give you the same. Just large to small. Okay, so which one you want to choose? Honestly, the one that looks the best. So if you go here, now we have a problem here. This rock is much bigger than this one. And what I mean by that is that the original mesh is much bigger. So we have a bunch of choices. Let me choose to see the big ones. You can either scale this thing down or you can make this one bigger. Why you don't want so much different size is because the bounding box here, like it's really gonna get messy here. Like for example, here you see the bounding box is smaller than the mesh, but here it's bigger, which is something you want. Like you want something like that that covers pretty much everything so that you can avoid intersections. Because if I put the transform points like very big, for example, like 5, you may have some cases where you have intersections because a bounding box is not really adjust to the object. So for now, I will just remove this mesh, show you the solution later if we have time. So our bounding box, it's pretty much the size of this thing. Let me move this thing here. So if I check the bounding box, it's pretty much there. It's nice. If the bounding box is not in the right size, you can always change the surface sampler to have something like, for example, 150. You have something larger, but you will see that it's it's much larger, and you don't want that. You want to be as tight as possible. So by default, it just happens that this box, it's the right size of this rock. But you want to put the same as we did with the big rocks, where you want the bounding box to be the same size. So that's great. Now we got the smaller rocks, and you have the big rocks. Now, other things you need to do, make sure you put the rotation 180 and 180 here, minus 180 and 180. The reason is you're gonna have as much variation as possible. So variation in sizes, variation in scale. Let me just put this one here, just in case. Okay, so what else you can do? Well, you can continue to spawn things. For example, you can spawn trees. Let me check in my example. I have the big rocks, I have trees, and I have smaller rocks. Okay, so let's start with the smaller rocks, because the smaller rocks don't really need to be spawned like everywhere, right? So let's just put a surface sampler here, put it here, and then this will be my little rocks. So my little rocks are gonna be this one. Okay, it's just this rock, and I did some changes here. By default, it's very flat. I'm gonna show you how I did it, okay? You saw that you can also do it. Just move this thing here. What I did was to move this thing here, and you can see that it's a little bit bended. That was done on purpose. So what I did was go to the modeling tab, go to the deform, and go to lattice. And here you can adjust the points. And I did a 3 by 3 by 3. And what I did was just to move these points down a little bit. I will do it very exaggerated, just so you can see what this does. Okay. You need to put cubic if you want a smooth result. And basically what I'm trying to avoid is when I spawn the objects is like floating like this. So when I spawn this thing, it's basically like that, right? I have a bunch of objects here, but that's better than floating objects, right? So let's just cancel this. I already did it. In your case, you can just accept. And let's put it on our graph. So let's go to our sampler. And let's just check the size first. So static mesh spawner, put it here. Now we're gonna put this one, mesh entries, and let's see how it looks like. Okay, so we have a case where everything is scattered like this, and it's very small. Let's take a look at why is that. We take a look at this. The bounding box is too big. Okay, so if the bounding box is too big, I'm not really gonna spawn this everywhere here, because there is still a bunch of empty spaces. When you have a bigger object, that's fine. So this is a case where you want your bounding box to be very small. So let's take a look at this case. For example, this is the size of the object. My bounding box may be a 10 by 10. Maybe that's a little bit too small. Let's go for 30. Let's put a 20 in height. There you go. So now you can see that I have the width. Let's put another width here. Is this something like more or less you want? Maybe put 35. Put 50. No, you don't want 50 here. Let's go back here and let's put like 40. Always trying to find the points. There you go. So now you have them here. And this is more or less what you have. So now, because I have less points, I can go here to my points per square meter, and I can just put 1, and I will have a lot. So let's have a look how our static mesh spawner looks like. Press D here. Now, it's still, we have empty spaces, which is something you want, because what else you want to do is you want to put materials in your landscape and everything so that you blend between the meshes and the materials. You don't want static meshes everywhere. But before we change the bounding box, we must change the transform here so it can look better. Transform, not this one. Transform points. And let me remove this. And now I can try first change the rotation. Okay, change this rotation. And change the scale. Maybe the minimum is 1, but the scale will be like 2.5. So let's have a look. Now it's better. And if you check the bounding box, you will see that the bounding box also changes. Oh, I disabled the node. Let me just... Yeah, there you go. If you press D, the bounding box is also changing when you do the transform points, which is great. So now you have something like this. If you really want to spawn more, make sure to put this one smaller. Even this small. And you will spawn more and more. If that's something you want. In my case, that's not what I want. Now, you see here that I'm also spawning. It should be something inside here. And in this case, inside the rocks, I will also have a lot of rocks that are spawning here that I don't really want. In this case, I need to use that difference node. So what I will do is to put here my difference. Sorry, I have my other screen. There you go. I can put my difference. And where do I want to put them? Well, I don't really need to check the intersections because this is the type of asset that you want to be intersected with others because you want to blend things out. So what you want to do is to put a difference here and put your source, and you want your source to be this one. In the small rocks, the end result here, the last one, is where my rocks will spawn. So I will want that. And I will also want the big rocks here. Because you can put many, this will add. So that's why it's called differences. And instead of minimum, you can put binary. And now you will see that there are no rocks here. Oh, sorry, I didn't put my static mesh. There you see. So now I have something like this, which it may or may not be something you want. So what you can do, if you want things to intersect a little bit better, you can put something called a bounce modifier. A bounce modifier basically will scale the bounds of your boxes. So if you go here, as you say, this is my big rocks. By the way, you can just press C to comment like big rocks here, so you know what you're spawning. So you can put a bounce modifier. Let me just remove this. And the bounce, what it will do, let me just put it, it will change the bounds of this mesh. So for example, the minimum can be 0.5 and the maximum 0.6. So what this will do is basically will make everything smaller, right? So in this case, if you spawn like this, which I'm already doing, you will have more meshes that are spawning around this. Because the bounding box is smaller, you are allowing some meshes to spawn near to this, which is really what you want, right? Because basically you want these meshes to blend like this, right? Let me just move this here so they can really blend around this mesh, just like this. So in case you get a result you don't want, for example, this one is like you are obviously avoiding this rock perfectly, you can do the same here. You can go to the big rock, and here you can put a bounce modifier. You can remove this, and I can just remove this bounce, make it smaller, and have some variation here. And just like that, you will have more rocks spawn here, just because the bounding box is smaller. Just make sure you don't have anything inside, which usually it should be the case. Like we didn't make it disappear. Like if I put the bounds to 0, then you will have cases where you have rocks inside of here. But because we put something like this, then nothing will spawn around this. Okay? You can do the same logic for pretty much everything. So for example, I want to spawn some grass. We can do it very easily. Hopefully with this exercise, you're seeing like how repetitive these nodes are. Okay. And they're actually the most common ones, which is what you want to do when you start out. You want to learn the basics. So surface sampler here, you can just drag this thing. And now you can just let's static mesh spawner, just as always, just to check the bounding box. And we will put some plants here. So I already have some plants. I can, I don't know, grab this one and just put it there. And now what we can do is to press D, check the bounding box. And actually, you don't see anything. Maybe because these things are inside of the other meshes. So let's just remove the static meshes for now, just for the moment. Now you can see I have my plants here. So for the plants, you want to be really something really small, your bounding box. You don't really want like maybe 5, like 5. Is that a good number? Maybe. And then you just put 1. You have a bunch of those here. And you can also do the transform, not this one, transform points. You can just click here. And what you can do is change the rotation by minus 180 and 180 here. And you can change the scale from 1 to 1.75. According to the statistics, people won't notice if you scale an object if you put 1.75. Okay. So I can just make this one more, like I can just put like 5. Maybe it will help. Yeah, I can just put 5, 3. I'm not exactly sure how much of these plants I want here, but let's just put 5 for now. And what I can do is to put a difference here. Difference. Let's transform these nodes. Put a difference here. Source. And what I want is to not spawn it on the rocks. So I will have this one. And this should already have all the differences, right? Because I only have space here where my plants can spawn, and I already have the difference between the big rocks and the small rocks here. So now I can just go here and just put the static mesh spawner and put the binary here. And this should work. Let's just see. Just put the static mesh spawner and the static mesh spawner here. So now my plants are spawning in places where my rocks are not spawning, which is what I want. Now, this is where the power comes from of procedurally generated content. I feel like I have too much rocks. So if I go to my rocks here, I can just divide by 2 here, and I will have much less rocks. Just like that. And the rest will be just plants, you know, and I will have much less rocks than before. Or if I feel like I have too many plants, I can just put 3 here, and I will reduce the amount of plants that I have. If you want to make it look prettier, you can just go to the static mesh modifier, and pretty much the result of your procedural content will greatly depend on your input. So if you put trash here, you will also get trash. So do not underestimate the result when you put different meshes here. For example, I can put this one here. And the more variations I have, the more natural it's going to be. And I can even put more and more variations. I can put like red plants, for example. And now when I check, this looks much better because I have much more variation. Okay, so hopefully you can understand what's going on here. Now, there is something I want to show you. So if I put this thing here on the cliff, you will find that it's really working fine. It's really working okay. But if I go to my landscape mode, but I will just save it as whatever. If I go to my landscape mode and sculpt this, I will have like different slope here, and some meshes here will basically spawn like here, like it's floating. Okay, so let's do it now. Let's go to landscape, and we're gonna sculpt something, and something like this, and we're gonna put a flattened node. It's like that. Right? Keep sculpting, basically until you have a slope like this. So this kind of a slope, it's kind of annoying. And if you put your procedural content here, you can make it bigger. You will find that it actually works fine here, but if you put it like in this area, let's go here, you will find that some of them are like floating like this. And this is not something you really want to have, especially when the slope is like this. So we can fix this. We can tell the graph that we only want some to spawn these things when there is a slope where it's, not stream. So in order to do this, what we need to do is to go here before everything. Remember, this is our smaller rocks. I will just put here medium rocks. And this will be my smaller rocks. And this will be my grass. So what I can do is to put a normal to density node. And by default, it already have the normal here, which is the z-axis. So you can just plug this thing here. And now what you will need to do is to put a density filter. So the density filter will filter like the density of this stuff. So let's just try it out. If you check the density here, the higher the slope, that you can see that where we have something here is like pretty white, and here is like very, very dark. So the darker it is, the more the slope, the streamer the slope is. So if I go here, you can see that I'm filtering some of these cases. Okay, and as I do this, I can just go here and I can change this to 0.9, where I can only avoid like extreme angles. I can just put this thing here and remove this. So now my rocks will only spawn there. So let me do the same for the rest of this. I can just copy this. And let me remove this thing here. And paste. That's for the big rocks. Just put it in position here. Okay. And now we're gonna do this for the smaller rocks. Especially for the smaller rocks are the ones that are gonna be the most affected. I'm gonna put the density here. And then we're gonna put the grass too. Okay. Should be good to go. So now all my meshes will spawn here. Now you have some stream cases of these ones that are spawning like this because this is the normal. What you can do for the smaller rocks, maybe it's to put the density to 0.99 to make it like really only spawn in flat areas. Which it's something you may or not want to have. So if I go here, you will see that my smaller rocks won't spawn that much. If I put 0.9, then it's back. Okay. Now I can continue and continue to add more stuff. And because I call this stream create a forest, let's just spawn some trees. Okay. So let's put a surface sampler. At this point, if you watch everything from the start until now, you may be very familiar with what is the workflow. You put a surface sampler, you put a static mesh spawner, okay, and you put your static mesh here. So I already have some trees that I import from my Unreal Marketplace, and I will just put this one. I will put one for now. Let's see how it looks like. Okay, so one thing is the tree is super big, and I don't want that because it makes all my stuff look like a toy. So let's first remove the points per square meter. You can put like divide by 2, divide by 2 again, divide by 2, divide by 2. There you go. Something like that. And also the bounding box, if you check the bounding box, is quite big. You can put 50 by 50. Okay, great. So now what you want to do is to put this, remove the intersections between the big rocks and the smaller rocks, because you want them to spawn here, right? It's normal for a tree to spawn in the middle of those things. So let's do that. But first, let's just change the size of this. So let's put a transform node, transform points. We just make it bigger so you can have a look. Just go here, transform points, static mesh spawner, and here my scale minimum will be like 0.3. Just have a look at what it looks like. And 0.6 maybe. I don't know why this rendering is like this. In 5.2 it looks pretty, looks weird. I hope they fix this. But anyway, let's just leave it like that. And now we just need to do a difference. And let's just do the rotation now, minus 180 and 180. And you can put the absolute rotation so the trees are only like this, like very vertical. You can put a small little rotation on X and Y, just so you can, you know, make some variations. So you can have them like this if you want. Okay, so let's remove this issue where some trees are spawning inside of this. In this case, it's not, but it could happen. So we know how to fix that. Difference between this, and we wanted the difference between this and the big rocks, which are here, not the bounding box modifier. We want difference between the medium rocks, okay, and it's here, and the rest we're gonna leave it like that. Okay, so let's see. We forgot to do something here. In the difference, we don't want minimum, we want binary. So now we don't have the trees here. Now we don't have much trees, so I'm gonna do something. I'm gonna go to the static mesh spawner and add another one. Let's add this one. A couple of trees should be good, more than enough to have variation for our small example. It's gonna take a while because it's loading, so I'm gonna check the comments. Yes, the trees can be replaced by actors. Actually, I'm using a static mesh spawner, but you can also use an actor spawner. So you can have a group of actors where you can have more control over what's the look of it. And you can spawn the actors. You can spawn pretty much everything. You don't need to spawn static meshes. If your meshes float above the terrain, you need to change the transform node to make it the C value like -10, -20. It depends on the pivot point of the mesh. Okay, that's where our heavy trees from Pixel.com. Surface sampler, I can multiply this by 2. I can multiply this by 2 if I even want to have more. This is really getting annoying. Okay. So now I have my trees and everything. And I could put the density here. Now, I already put the absolute rotation. So if I spawn my trees here on the mountain, they will spawn. But I don't really want that because that doesn't happen. So what I want to do is to put the density, our filter, normal to density. And I will put the density to 0.7 maybe. And then you will only have trees spawning in a slope that is not too extreme. So if I go here, you will see that my trees won't spawn in my mountain, which is good. And if you don't see meshes here, make sure to change your normal to density filter. The big rocks, for example, can be like 0.5, 0.6, or 0.7, something like that. Okay. And the smaller rocks, where are you? Smaller rocks. This is a problem when you have a big rock like this and you don't really name stuff. Normal to density, sorry, density filters should be like 0.6. And you have more. And the grass can be the same. Just leave it at 0.5. The grass really don't matter much. So now your trees won't spawn in a slope that is like this. And if I put it something like this, they will adjust little by little. Now, I think that's pretty much what I wanted to show you on procedural content generation. We have seen a bunch of the stuff. We've seen how to use a surface sampler, how to use the slope, how to transform points, how to use the bounce modifier, the self-pruning to avoid intersections, how to spawn objects, and how to use the difference nodes to basically remove the spawning points in places where we don't want. And just by doing this, you can already have pretty solid stuff.